So when you're optimizing an image or doing post-production, whatever you want to call it, it's important to remember that while you never want to manipulate an image in a way that it's showing something that was not there, you also need to recognize that there are limitations to photographs in showing in a two-dimensional format what you saw in a three-dimensional world. Sometimes that means lightening or darkening something. Sometimes it means reducing saturation in an area. All in this case, perhaps to emphasize depth. First off, I'm going to crop the image. I want to emphasize that horizontality, the horizontal elements of this landscape. So I'm going to bring it in from the top and from the bottom. Sometimes it's good to go through the exercise of just playing with it and cropping it until it fails, so to speak, or so until you don't think it's improving. One of those great things about Lightroom is you can undo multiple times, and so you can quickly review what is an improvement. What I'm looking for here is to eliminate distractions. So I'm cutting the sky out a bit, and I'm cutting a lot of this lower end out. So it brings our eye a bit more into the road as it swings into the center of the image. It brings your eye in. Now, when it comes to composition, corners are very important, and so leading lines that come in from the corner can really be very powerful elements. Diagonals are especially strong features in composition, and diagonals that are anchored in corners even more so. So I'm going to stay with that crop. Obviously, we can change it over time. One of the great things about Lightroom is that I can make multiple changes to color, etc., and later on still go back and adjust the crop if I want to. All of the tools up here have shortcuts. R is the shortcut for the cropping tool. So this is a really well exposed image. It's very even. Obviously it was an overcast day, so there's not any super hard shadows, which makes this job really easy today. So there's not a lot I'm going to need to do. My primary focus, no pun intended, is down here with the cyclist. That's where I'm most concerned to have the exposure dead on, as well as having this be where your eye ends up. An interesting challenge to keep in mind is that even though digital cameras have come so far in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, one of the things that digital cameras still struggle with is reds and greens, or are reds and greens. Sometimes greens can just get way too saturated. Same with reds, and they end up popping out too much. In the case of this photograph, that's actually something we want. We want the red to pop out because that's the subject of our picture. But it's important to become aware of it, or be aware of it, because if you manipulate exposure, change exposure, or change intensity, contrast, or play with shadows, blacks, whites, highlights, and such, just be aware that the greens may get so vibrant that they're basically fluorescent, and sometimes reds can do that too. And it becomes especially bad when you have red and green together. So we're just going to be aware of that. So in an image like this is a lighter area and this is darker, and I want our eye to go a bit more to here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the brush tool, and I'm going to lighten it or reduce the exposure a bit. You can see that with my little roller here on the mouse, I can enlarge or make smaller the area of influence from that gradient. And I'm going to drop the contrast down a bit and increase the exposure. The exposure is at plus 0.5. So I'm just going to do that really subtly to lighten this area up. And you'll notice that if I hover over this, it shows the area of influence. So I can now go in and manipulate that. I don't want to, but anything that is in that area is going to be lightened by that. That's the area. That red area is showing what's happening there. Now I've lightened that a little. I'm going to keep working on this just a bit more. And then I want to darken this down just a little so our eye goes a bit more towards this. But I want to be very subtle about it. Again, we don't want to manipulate it and show it show it in a way that it wasn't, just misrepresent the scene. So I'm going to reduce the exposure on that, and I'm going to reduce the contrast. One thing to bear in mind, though, is when you are lightening something, often you will get it will flatten an image out. So just want to be aware of that. Again, we can just move this around. We can rotate it. We can expand it. But I really just want to affect this area. So I'm going to keep it pretty much like that. And then I can play with this and see what works. So again, I want to make it very subtle. And turn that off. So our eye's going a bit more here. But you'll also notice that I feel like this has gotten a little more intense. So what I'm going to do is go back to that spot right here, select that, and take some of the saturation out of it just a little. Not so much. I'm sorry, that's overall saturation, so we're not going to mess with that. There we go, saturation. Just desaturate that just a hair. I don't want it to make it look desaturated, but nor do I want that saturation too heavy. Okay, so let's get rid of that. The only other thing I'd like to do is maybe emphasize the edge here. So what I'm going to do is maybe lighten this background a little, just the trees. And so we're going to go back here to the brush tool and lighten this area. Let's see the area of influence there. Okay, pretty subtle. And actually, there we go. I'm going to pop that up a bit. Now I can go ahead and just add to that. As long as I'm hovering over that when I start, it's adding to it. And again, I can go back and see that difference. Yeah, not too keen on that. It's a little too exaggerated, so I'm just going to drop it back a bit. I just want it to be subtle. Okay, so that's about right. There's not a lot we needed to do to this image. Let's go ahead and go back to the import, what it looked like. Actually, let's look at the final crop, and then we're going up to here. So what I've done is I could have done this area a bit more carefully, but this is darkened down a bit and this is lightened up a bit. So all I need to do now is export it, and I'm good to go.